Hey everyone, in today's video I'll show you how to naturally lower your MMR in the Cycle Frontier and still make big money. With the method I show you to lower your MMR, you will still be able to drop down and play the game exactly how you normally would. Use whatever gear you want, fight or friend whoever you want, all while continuing to make big money and increase your bankroll. This video will cover what MMR is, how it's calculated in the Cycle Frontier, why you would want to reduce your MMR, and finally how to reduce your MMR without tanking. I'll have some timestamps in the description below if you want to jump to a specific part of the video. This is going to be a little bit more in depth than my usual vids. MMR, or matchmaking rating, is what competitive multiplayer games have begun to use, matching players together based on whatever criteria the developers decide. In most cases, games choose to match players based on statistics like kill to death ratio or other stats to paint a good picture of that player's skill level in the game. Games do this to help protect players that are new or perhaps lack the refined skills that others have to ensure they still enjoy playing the game, as well as make a great late game experience for veteran players. So how does MMR work in the Cycle Frontier? The Cycle Frontier devs have changed how MMR works many times since the beta, so it's likely that it'll continue to be adjusted, but for now, this is the general gist of how it is as of patch 1.3.8. MMR on the Cycle Frontier looks at a lot of things and has a bunch of variables. For starters, speed of matchmaking is extremely high on the priority list because instant queuing is a highly coveted feature of the game, and we absolutely want to keep it that way. It will also look at your geolocation. Where you are in the world impacts which servers you'll be connecting to, and depending on the player population in that area, it can also influence how strict or relaxed the matchmaking will be. In the same vein as geolocation, time of day matters a huge amount as well. Queuing up to play at 9 AM Eastern on a Wednesday is going to be a much different experience than queuing up at 9 PM Eastern on a Saturday. When the algorithm has more player population to choose from, it's more effective at sticking to the guidelines set for each MMR bucket. In this same example, as a high MMR player, if I solo queue up at 9 AM Eastern on Wednesday, I'm going to run into fewer squads than I would at 9 PM on Saturday when there's a much higher population playing the game. A big kicker to MMR is your average K-marks extraction value in your recent games. Now, I have done a lot of testing on this, and the recent game seems to be in the 20 game range. So your average K-marks in your last 20 games is having a big impact on which bucket you get put in. The devs like using average K-marks as a metric because it shows how good you are at prospecting, regardless of how you choose to play the game. This subsequently creates lobbies with players of varying playstyles and skills, creating a more natural feel for the game. Another huge impact to MMR is whether or not you're queued up as a solo player or in a squad. When you queue up as a squad, your MMR is increased because you have more players, and vice versa. If you queue up as a solo, then your MMR is naturally reduced. Despite popular belief, the type of loadout you drop into raid with does not impact your MMR. So if you are in a high MMR bucket and drop in full white armor, you will still encounter the same player base as you did before. This theory was directly addressed and refuted by the lead game designer in a recent interview. I'm sure there are probably some unknown variables added into the mix as well that the devs have not shared with us, and also remember that it could easily change. Like I said earlier, it has changed quite a bit so far, and it could change in the future. So I mentioned MMR buckets a few times, and here's some more detail on those. In the 1.3.8 patch notes, some adjustments were made to MMR, and we were given specific detail as to what these buckets looked like. As you can see, there are only 4 total buckets. Bucket 1, starting solos and duos that are not so great at the game. Bucket 2, good solos, not great duos, and underperforming trios. Bucket 3, good duos and trios that are decent. And Bucket 4, decent trios, exceptionally good duos, and no solos will ever set foot in here. Now, as you can see, a lot of this is kind of like generic wording, but this generic wording, like duos that are not so great at the game, that value is based around an average K-marks extraction value. I just want to reiterate that because that is the metric that they are using to evaluate your skill at the game. So now that we know what MMR is and how it's calculated in the Cycle Frontier, let's talk about why you would want to reduce your MMR in the first place. Higher MMR buckets will generally consist of highly skilled PvP players and squads. As a solo player in the highest MMR bucket, you'll find yourself up against fully kitted players all the time, along with duos and trios. Now, even if the duos and trios aren't of the highest skill, consistently wiping 2- and 3-man squads can be quite difficult for the average player. While challenging yourself against a good team is surely fun sometimes, but when it's happening multiple times a raid, it can be exhausting and ultimately less and less fun. Having to constantly be on your A game every minute of every raid can make enjoying the game casually a very difficult proposition. Sometimes you just want to kick your feet back and run around in white gear, or even do a knife run without getting blasted by an advocate in your first player encounter. Lower MMR buckets have way more VoIP and player interactions instead of your typical kill-on-sight Chad. I mean, I'm not blaming the Chad for wiping you off the face of the planet in a millisecond. It's just not worth the risk for him considering how expensive the high-end loadouts cost. Maybe you're really good at scavenging, but not so good at PvP. I mean, not everyone has the time to dedicate towards improving their PvP skills, and perhaps you're feeling frustrated, constantly losing fights. Lastly, there's just less cheaters in the lower MMR buckets because they all have astronomically high stats and are almost always being placed in the highest possible MMR. Now, the devs are doing an incredible job of combating cheating, and they continue to get better and better at it with each patch, but it's always going to be a problem in any multiplayer game that you play, and this is going to be a way to help you avoid some of that. Okay, so how do we lower our MMR? The natural instinct for players is to drop down to the planet and fill up their backpack with as much loot as possible and extract. This behavior is reinforced by the game showing you your total loot value after each evac, enticing you to keep trying to outdo yourself with higher and higher extraction values. Much of these items end up getting sold to the factions to increase their reputation and gain bankroll for future raids and equipment. This is where you're going to make a fundamental change to your playstyle. If you only extract off the planet with loot that is required for your level 12 faction jobs, then your average K-marks per match value will drastically decrease along with your MMR, and you will still be making big money from completing those jobs. I tested this strategy out for a couple of days and noticed a dramatic difference in the sweatiness of the lobbies and was still making a huge amount of money from the jobs. Now, if you see a voltaic brood or anything of high value to you, of course, take it. But generally speaking, you should only extract the items you need for active missions and jobs in order to keep your average K-marks per raid down and thus your MMR down. Because MMR is calculated based on recent game history, you can implement this strategy whenever you want. If you want to start doing it when you've got all your traders to level 8, knock yourself out. You can always switch back and forth between the playstyles, but ultimately you switch to this method, and after 20 or so raids, you will see a dramatic reduction in your MMR. Now, you could just knife run 20 raids in a row, or even cheese your MMR by killing yourself off spawn because a death counts as a 0 to your average K-marks. But your MMR will always increase back to where it was unless you make this fundamental change to your playstyle. So if you want to always keep your MMR low, you need to adopt this strategy when you've got your factions to level 8 or 12 or however high you can get them, and stick to it for as long as you want. I hope this video helped you out, and make sure to drop a sub for more Cycle Frontier content, and I'll catch you in the next one.